The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Millbrook Hotel's ballroom sparkled like frozen tears above Sarah Mitchell's head as she stood, paralyzed, watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. The annual charity gala, usually a celebration of Connecticut's elite philanthropy, had transformed into her personal nightmare. Her emerald silk dress, once a symbol of elegance, now felt like a mockery as whispers and pointed fingers surrounded her. "I trusted you," thundered Maxwell Richardson III, CEO of Richardson Enterprises, his face contorted with rage. "You were supposed to be managing our charitable foundation's accounts, not destroying everything we built." Sarah's throat constricted as she tried to form words, her mind racing to understand how this could be happening. Just hours ago, she had been preparing to present the foundation's annual report, proud of the millions they had raised for children's education. Now, she stood accused of embezzlement, facing not just Maxwell's wrath but the judgmental stares of everyone she had worked with for the past decade. "I didn't do this," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone must have tampered with the accounts. I would never." "Save it." Victoria Richardson, Maxwell's wife and Sarah's former mentor, stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hand clutching a stack of papers. "We have proof. Every transaction, every fake account, all traced back to you. How could you steal from children?" The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her gaze darted around the room, seeking a friendly face among the sea of judgmental stares. There was none. Even Jennifer Collins, her assistant of 5 years, stood in the corner, avoiding eye contact. The betrayal in her chest deepened as she noticed Jennifer's slight nod toward Victoria. Through the blur of tears she refused to shed, Sarah caught sight of James Crawford, the foundation's financial director, standing slightly behind Maxwell. Was that a hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth? The same James who had been unusually interested in her work these past months, always offering to help with the accounts, always staying late at the office. "Security," Maxwell's voice boomed across the ballroom. "Please escort Ms. Mitchell out." "And Sarah?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Expect to hear from our lawyers. We'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are." As 2 uniformed guards approached, Sarah straightened her spine, years of her grandmother's lessons echoing in her mind. "When they push you down, rise with dignity." She lifted her chin, meeting Maxwell's gaze directly. "One day," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "you'll realize what a terrible mistake you've made." The walk across the ballroom felt eternal. Hundreds of eyes followed her every step, accompanied by the hushed whispers of people who had dined at her table countless times, who had praised her work, who had called her friend. Now they watched her disgrace with barely concealed satisfaction. Outside, the October air bit at her exposed shoulders, but Sarah barely felt it. Her mind was already racing, analyzing every interaction, every document, every late-night meeting that had led to this moment. James Crawford's face kept appearing in her thoughts, along with fragments of conversations that now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Her phone buzzed incessantly, news traveled fast in their circles. By morning, her reputation would be in tatters, her career in philanthropy destroyed. Already, social media would be lighting up with the scandal: trusted foundation director accused of stealing from children's charity. As she walked down the hotel's grand steps, Sarah caught her reflection in a darkened window. The woman staring back at her looked different somehow, harder, more determined. Her grandmother's words came back to her again, this time from one of their last conversations before she passed: "Sometimes, sweetheart, life breaks you down to build you up stronger." A taxi pulled up, its yellow light a beacon in the darkness. Before stepping in, Sarah took one last look at the hotel's gleaming facade. Something clicked in her mind, a memory of an odd file name she'd glimpsed on James's computer, a series of offshore account numbers that hadn't made sense at the time. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. Sarah's fingers curled around her phone, her mind already formulating a plan. She had built her career on attention to detail, on understanding complex financial trails. If someone had set her up, they had left tracks. And she would find them. "The nearest public library," she answered. She needed a computer that couldn't be traced back to her. And then the train station. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Sarah allowed herself one small, grim smile. They thought they had destroyed her, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Her grandmother hadn't raised her to be a victim, she had raised her to be a survivor. In the coming days, they would learn that the woman they had laughed at, the one they had tried to break, was about to become someone they would fear. But first, she had work to do, and it would start tonight, in the quiet corners of a public library where she would begin unraveling the web of lies they had spun around her. The taxi disappeared into the night, carrying Sarah toward a future she couldn't yet imagine, but one she would shape with her own hands, one calculated move at a time. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Millbrook Public Library cast stark shadows across Sarah's face as her fingers flew over the keyboard. It was nearly midnight, and she was the only patron left in the building, save for a drowsy security guard who kept shooting concerned glances her way. The events of the gala played on repeat in her mind, but now, 4 hours into her investigation, a different picture was emerging. "Oh, James," she whispered, staring at the screen. "You really thought I wouldn't figure it out?" Before her lay a complex web of financial transactions, each one carefully disguised but forming a pattern she recognized all too well. James Crawford hadn't just set her up, he'd been orchestrating this plan for over a year. The revelation made her stomach churn, but it also ignited a fierce determination in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, the 20th call from her mother tonight. Sarah ignored it, just as she'd ignored the hundreds of notifications flooding her social media. The story had already broken, just as she'd predicted. Trusted charity director accused of massive fraud screamed the headlines of the local news websites. "Miss?" The security guard approached, keys jangling. "We're closing in 5 minutes." Sarah nodded, quickly downloading the last bits of information onto a newly purchased USB drive. She'd used cash for everything tonight, the taxi, the drive, even the coffee that sat cold and untouched beside her. Years of working with high-net-worth donors had taught her the importance of discretion, and now those lessons would serve a different purpose. Outside, the October night had grown colder. Sarah pulled her emerald gala dress tighter around her shoulders, wishing she'd had time to change. A group of late-night revelers passed by, their laughter echoing off the buildings, reminding her of the mocking faces at the gala. But this time, instead of pain, she felt resolve crystallizing in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello, Sarah." The voice was familiar, warm, and entirely unexpected. "I think we need to talk." "Mr. Chen?" Sarah's breath caught. David Chen had been her first major donor at the foundation, a self-made tech billionaire known for his strategic mind and unwavering loyalty. "Meet me at the Night Owl Diner in 30 minutes, he said. "And Sarah?" "Don't tell anyone." The Night Owl Diner sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. Inside, the scent of coffee and greasy fries filled the air. Sarah found David Chen in a corner booth, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit. "You look like hell," he said as she slid into the booth. "Always the charmer, David." Despite everything, Sarah felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "Why am I here?" "Because," he leaned forward, his voice dropping, 6 months ago, James Crawford approached me with an investment opportunity. Something about it felt wrong, so I had him investigated." He pulled out a manila envelope. "I think you'll find this interesting." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, James meeting with known criminals, bank statements showing massive transfers to offshore accounts, and most damning of all, emails discussing the plan to frame her. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" she demanded, anger flaring. "I needed proof, and I needed to know if you were involved." David's dark eyes studied her face. "Tonight confirmed what I suspected. You were the perfect scapegoat, trusted, dedicated, and just naive enough not to see it coming." The words stung, but Sarah couldn't deny their truth. "So now what?" "Now," David smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile, "we plan your comeback. But first, you need to disappear." "Disappear?" Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. "I have a private compound in Montana. You'll be safe there while we gather evidence. I'll provide you with everything you need, new clothes, technology, resources. Consider it an investment in justice." Sarah stared at the photos spread before her. "Why would you help me?" "Because 15 years ago, someone tried to destroy me the same way. I fought back and won. Now it's your turn." He pulled out another envelope, this one containing cash and a key. But understand this, once we start, there's no going back. The old Sarah Mitchell, the kind and trusting philanthropist, needs to die tonight. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the sky. Sarah thought of her grandmother again, of all the lessons about kindness and forgiveness she'd taught her. But she also remembered another lesson: sometimes, sweetheart, the only way to defeat darkness is to master it yourself. I understand, she said, taking the key. Good. There's a car waiting behind the diner. Everything you need for the next week is inside. My private jet will be ready at dawn. David stood, straightening his suit. One more thing, Sarah. James Crawford isn't working alone. The rot in Richardson Enterprises goes deep, and Maxwell Richardson himself might be involved. Sarah's mind flashed to Victoria Richardson's triumphant smile at the gala. I know, she said quietly. I always knew there was something wrong with their numbers, but I trusted them. She let out a bitter laugh. Trust, my greatest weakness. No, David corrected her, trust was your greatest strength. Now survival will be. As David left the diner, Sarah remained in the booth, studying her reflection in the window. The woman who had walked into the gala tonight was already fading, like a photograph left too long in the sun. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone harder, colder, more calculating. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from Jennifer, her traitorous assistant. I'm so sorry, Sarah. They made me do it. I had no choice. Sarah turned off the phone and dropped it into her coffee cup, watching it sink into the dark liquid. No more distractions, no more explanations, no more apologies. She had work to do. Behind the diner, she found a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. Inside was a suitcase containing everything David had promised: clothes, cash, a new phone, and a laptop. As she slid behind the wheel, rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of the woman they had tried to destroy. Goodbye, Sarah Mitchell, she whispered to her reflection in the rearview mirror. Time to become someone they'll never see coming. The SUV disappeared into the night, carrying her toward Montana and the beginning of her transformation. Behind her, Millbrook's lights flickered in the rain, like stars going out one by one. But ahead, a storm was brewing, one that would shake Richardson Enterprises to its core and teach them all the price of underestimating the woman they had laughed at. In the coming months, they would learn that their greatest mistake wasn't in betraying her, it was in leaving her alive to seek revenge. Montana's big sky country stretched endlessly before Sarah as she stood on the balcony of David Chen's mountain compound. 3 months had passed since the night of the gala, 3 months of intensive training that had transformed both her body and mind. The bitter cold of December bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed it anymore. Again came the stern voice behind her. Sarah turned to face Natasha Petrova, the former Russian intelligence operative David had hired as her mentor. The woman's steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp as she assessed her pupil. You're still thinking like a philanthropist, Natasha criticized, her accent thick with disapproval. Show me how to destroy Richardson Enterprises. Sarah moved to the elaborate digital display in the compound's war room. Her fingers, now adorned with perfectly manicured blood-red nails, danced across the touchscreen, pulling up complex financial diagrams. Richardson's empire has 3 main vulnerabilities, Sarah explained, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. Their Asian markets are overextended, their digital infrastructure is outdated, and their board of directors is divided. But their real weakness? A slight smile played at her lips. Their arrogance. Natasha nodded approvingly. And James Crawford? Is merely a pawn. Sarah pulled up another screen, revealing a web of connections she'd uncovered. The real puppet master is Victoria Richardson. She's been embezzling funds for years, using children's charities as fronts for money laundering. I was getting too close to the truth without even knowing it. The door opened, and David Chen entered, accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man Sarah had come to know as Marcus Sterling, one of the most feared corporate raiders on Wall Street. Your student is ready, Natasha announced, surprising Sarah with the rare compliment. David approached the display, studying the diagrams. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. Everything needs to be perfect. He turned to Sarah. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back. Sarah walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as snow began to fall. The woman reflected in the glass was almost unrecognizable from the one who had fled Millbrook that October night. Gone was the soft, wavy brown hair, replaced by a sleek platinum blonde style that made her look both sophisticated and dangerous. Her body, once slim and unassuming, had been sculpted by countless hours in the compound's gym. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They now held a coldness that would have shocked anyone who had known her before. "Show them what you've prepared," Marcus prompted, his deep voice resonating through the room. Sarah pressed another button, and new images filled the screens. "I've created a shell company, Phoenix Rising Ventures. On paper, it appears to be a 5-year-old investment firm with impressive returns. In reality," she smiled, and it was not a kind expression, "it's the weapon that will let us take control of Richardson Enterprises piece by piece." "And the money trail?" David asked. "Untraceable. I've used everything they taught me about hiding transactions against them. Every dollar has been laundered so cleanly it sparkles." She turned to face her mentors. "I've also made contact with 3 board members who have grievances against Maxwell. They don't know my real identity, but they're ready to support a hostile takeover." Marcus stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "The legal framework? All in place. We have evidence of their crimes, but we'll only use it if absolutely necessary. I don't want them in jail." Sarah's voice hardened. "I want them to lose everything, just like they tried to do to me." Natasha clapped her hands slowly. "Now that sounds like a woman out for revenge." A ping from one of the computers drew their attention. Sarah pulled up an email, and her eyes narrowed. Jennifer's made contact again. "Your former assistant?" David moved closer to read the message. "Can she be trusted?" "No one can be trusted," Sarah replied, echoing one of Natasha's earliest lessons. "But she's terrified and desperate. Victoria's been threatening her family. She's ready to turn on them, and she has access to files that could help us." "It could be a trap," Marcus warned. "Of course it's a trap." Sarah's laugh was cold. "They've probably figured out I'm not really hiding in shame in Europe, as we let them believe. They're getting nervous, making mistakes. Jennifer's email is their way of trying to flush me out." David studied her face carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to give them what they want, a glimpse of the new Sarah Mitchell." She pulled up another screen, this one showing the layout of a high-end restaurant in New York City. Jennifer suggested meeting at Le Cirque next week. Very public, very safe. Her smile turned predatory. Very perfect for making an entrance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" David's concern was evident. "Once they see you." "They need to see me," Sarah interrupted. "They need to know that I'm not hiding, not running, not broken. Besides," she added, turning back to the screens, "it's time to start placing our pieces on the board." Natasha nodded approvingly. "You'll need the right armor for this battle." "Already arranged." Sarah pulled up one final image, a sketch of a dramatic black designer dress that would announce to the world that she was no longer the woman in emerald silk they had humiliated. "I've learned from Victoria Richardson herself, appearance is a weapon." As her mentors discussed final details, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Richardson Enterprises stock had dropped another 2 points, responding to the whispers of instability their shell company had been carefully spreading through the market. "Look," she called their attention to the stock ticker. "The vultures are already circling. Maxwell Richardson will be getting desperate calls from shareholders by morning." "And Victoria?" Marcus asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "We'll be too busy dealing with some interesting questions from her private banker in Geneva." Amazing how many red flags can suddenly appear in previously pristine accounts. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, revenge is a dish best served cold." "No," Sarah corrected him, her voice carrying an Arctic chill. "Revenge is a dish best served in courses." "And this?" She gestured to the displays showing their intricate plans. "This is just the appetizer." As night fell over the Montana mountains, Sarah remained in the war room, refining their strategy. The sound of wolves howling in the distance brought a smile to her face. She had learned much from these predators during her time here. Patience, precision, and the knowledge that sometimes the pack is stronger than the lone hunter. In her mind, she could already see the faces of Maxwell and Victoria Richardson when they realized what was coming. They had created their own destruction the night they decided to destroy Sarah Mitchell. Now they would meet the woman they had forced her to become. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in pristine white. Soon, Sarah thought, it would be time to leave this sanctuary and return to the world that had cast her out. But she wouldn't be returning as a victim seeking redemption. She would be returning as their nightmare. Lucerque buzzed with the elegant chatter of New York's elite, the crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow that reminded Sarah of that fateful night at the Millbrook Hotel. But this time, she wasn't the prey, she was the predator. Miss Phoenix, the maitre d' purred, using the name she'd carefully cultivated over the past months. Your usual table is ready. Sarah smiled, knowing that the substantial payments David had arranged to establish her new identity had paid off. As far as Lucerque's staff was concerned, Catherine Phoenix was a mysterious but incredibly wealthy regular who had been dining there for years, even though this was her first actual visit. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the marble floor as she followed the maitre d' to a corner table with a perfect view of the entire restaurant. The black Valentino dress she wore was a masterpiece of understated power, its severe lines and dramatic cut making her look like she had stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. Her platinum blonde hair gleamed under the lights, and more than one head turned to watch her passage. Jennifer was already there, fidgeting with her water glass, looking smaller and more afraid than Sarah remembered. When she looked up and saw Sarah, her face went white. "Oh my God," Jennifer whispered. "Sarah?" "Hello, Jennifer." Sarah's voice was cool as she took her seat, noting how her former assistant's hands began to tremble. "You look nervous." You look so different." Jennifer's eyes darted around the restaurant. "I almost didn't recognize you." That was rather the point. Sarah signaled the waiter with a subtle gesture Natasha had taught her. "Champagne. The Krug, I think. 1998. As the waiter hurried away, Sarah studied Jennifer with the calculating gaze she'd perfected under Natasha's tutelage. The younger woman was wearing a dress that was slightly too expensive for her salary, a gift from Victoria Richardson, perhaps? "They sent you to find me, didn't they?" Sarah asked, though it wasn't really a question. Jennifer's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. They threatened my mother's nursing home care, and then Victoria said she'd make sure I never worked in Connecticut again, and..." "Spare me the excuses." Sarah's voice could have frozen flame. "I'm more interested in what they offered you to set up this meeting." The champagne arrived, and Sarah took a deliberate sip, watching as Jennifer's eyes darted to her phone. Expecting a message? Perhaps from James Crawford? Or is Victoria handling this personally? "How did you know?" Sarah smiled, and Jennifer flinched. "I know everything, Jennifer. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the real purpose of the Richardson Children's Initiative. I even know about that interesting little transfer you made to your Cayman Islands account 2 days before the gala." Jennifer's face went from white to gray. "They said they'd protect me." "Like they protected me?" Sarah leaned forward. "Tell me, how does it feel to be Victoria Richardson's new protégé? Enjoying my old office?" "Please," Jennifer whispered, "they're watching. They'll know I warned you." Sarah's laugh was musical but held no warmth. "Of course they're watching." In fact, she turned slightly, raising her glass toward a distinguished-looking man at the bar. "I believe Mr. Crawford is doing the honors himself tonight." James Crawford froze, his own glass halfway to his lips. Even from across the room, Sarah could see the shock in his eyes as he recognized her. Now, Sarah turned back to Jennifer. "Let's discuss your future." "My future?" Sarah took another sip of champagne. "You have 2 options. First option, you continue working for Victoria, helping her steal from children's charities, until they eventually decide you're a liability and destroy you just like they tried to destroy me." Jennifer's hands were shaking so badly now that water slopped over the edge of her glass. Second option, Sarah continued, pulling an envelope from her clutch, you take this and disappear. Inside you'll find a one-way ticket to Vancouver, credentials for a new identity, and enough money to start fresh. Consider it a severance package. Why would you help me after what I did to you? Sarah's smile turned razor-sharp. Because in about 30 seconds, James Crawford is going to call Victoria Richardson and tell her what he's seeing. By tomorrow morning, they'll be in complete disarray, wondering what else I know and who else I might have turned. Your disappearance will only add to their paranoia. As if on cue, Crawford stood from the bar, phone already pressed to his ear as he hurried toward the exit. Time to choose, Jennifer, Sarah said softly. But choose quickly. That ticket is for tonight's red-eye flight. Jennifer stared at the envelope for a long moment before reaching for it with trembling fingers. What are you going to do to them? Nothing they haven't earned. Sarah stood, smoothing her dress. Oh, and Jennifer? If I were you, I'd leave before Victoria's security team arrives. They should be here in. She checked her watch, about 10 minutes, but they'll be looking for the old Sarah Mitchell. They won't notice another scared young woman slipping out the back. As Jennifer hurried away, clutching the envelope, Sarah settled back in her chair and ordered another glass of champagne. Right on schedule, her phone buzzed with a message from David Chen, Phase 1 complete. Board members notified of emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she watched Victoria Richardson's security team burst through the restaurant's entrance 7 minutes later, their expensive suits unable to completely hide their true nature. They searched every corner of Lou Cirque, but of course, they found nothing. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Sterling was meeting with Richardson Enterprises' largest shareholders, planting seeds of doubt about Maxwell's leadership. And in Geneva, a team of forensic accountants hired by David Chen was beginning their audit of Victoria's secret accounts. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Maxwell Richardson himself. We need to talk. She let out a quiet laugh, remembering how he had humiliated her at the gala. Now he wanted to talk? She typed a quick response, the time for talking has passed, Maxwell. But don't worry, you'll be seeing me soon enough. As she left Lou Cirque, Sarah caught her reflection in a mirror. The woman who stared back was a perfect blend of sophistication and danger, exactly the image she had wanted to project. But it wasn't just an image anymore, it was who she had become. In the town car waiting outside, Natasha sat reading reports on her tablet. Crawford took the bait? Like a starving fish, Sarah confirmed, sliding into the leather seat. He'll be telling Victoria about my transformation right now, painting a picture of a dangerous, wealthy, mysterious woman who seems to know all their secrets. And Jennifer? Already on her way to the airport, I expect. Victoria's going to be furious when she realizes one of her pawns has vanished. Natasha nodded approvingly. The board meeting tomorrow? Will be interesting. Sarah's smile was predatory. Especially when Phoenix Rising Ventures makes its first formal offer to purchase Richardson Enterprises' Asian subsidiaries. The car glided through Manhattan's nighttime traffic, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights. Inside, Sarah reviewed the next phase of their plan on her tablet, each detail meticulously crafted to bring maximum pressure on the Richardsons. You know, Natasha said quietly, revenge is like a fine wine. Too much haste can spoil it. Don't worry, Sarah replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. I've learned my lesson about patience. Maxwell and Victoria Richardson aren't going to fall in a day. But they will fall. She looked out at the city skyline. And when they do, they'll know exactly who caused their destruction. The car turned toward the penthouse David had prepared for her triumphant return to society. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to savor this first small victory, the look of fear in James Crawford's eyes when he recognized her, the panic she knew was spreading through Victoria's carefully ordered world. They had tried to bury her. They never expected her to rise from the ashes, transformed into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. The Richardson Enterprises boardroom occupied the entire top floor of their Manhattan headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city below. Sarah stood at those windows now, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. The room behind her was still empty, but soon it would become a battlefield. "They're on their way up," Marcus Sterling announced, entering the room with a stack of documents. "Maxwell looks like he hasn't slept in days." "Good." Sarah turned, her white power suit a stark contrast to the dark boardroom. "Victoria? Already here." "She's in Maxwell's office, trying to damage control after Jennifer's disappearance." Marcus smiled grimly. The timing of that little maneuver was perfect. Sarah moved to the head of the massive oak table, her fingers trailing along its polished surface. This was where Maxwell Richardson had sat for 20 years, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Today, that would change. The doors burst open, and Victoria Richardson stormed in, her usual elegant composure notably absent. She stopped dead when she saw Sarah. "You," Victoria hissed, her perfectly made-up face contorting with rage. "How dare you show your face here?" "Good morning, Victoria." Sarah's smile was arctic. "Love the Chanel suit. Although..." She paused deliberately, "it looks a bit worn." "Financial troubles?" Victoria's hand twitched toward her phone, but before she could reach it, the boardroom began filling with other arrivals. Board members, senior executives, and shareholders filed in, many doing double takes when they saw Sarah. The whispers started immediately. Maxwell Richardson was the last to enter, flanked by James Crawford and a team of lawyers. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his face gray with stress. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Security. Your security team won't be joining us," Marcus stepped forward. "They're currently busy dealing with some rather interesting federal agents who have questions about certain overseas transactions." "Who are you people?" Maxwell's voice rose. "And you," he pointed at Sarah, "you're supposed to be in Europe, hiding in shame after what you did." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing off the boardroom's walls. "Hiding? Oh, Maxwell. I've been quite busy these past few months. Allow me to introduce myself properly." She straightened to her full height. Catherine Phoenix, CEO of Phoenix Rising Ventures, and as of this morning, owner of 20% of Richardson Enterprises shares. The room erupted in chaos. Board members jumped to their feet, lawyers began frantically flipping through papers, and Victoria's face went from rage to terror in an instant. "Impossible," James Crawford stammered. "We would have known." "Would you?" Sarah cut him off. "The same way you knew about the real embezzlement happening under your nose? The same way you knew about Victoria's private accounts in Geneva?" She pressed a button, and the boardroom's screens came to life, displaying damning financial documents. "The same way you knew I would eventually discover your little scheme to frame me?" "These documents are fake," Victoria declared, but her voice trembled. "Are they?" Sarah turned to the board members. "Ask your new CFO about the audit currently happening in your Asian subsidiaries. Ask about the discrepancies found in the children's charity accounts. Ask about the mysterious transfers that somehow all lead back to accounts controlled by the Richardson family." Maxwell slumped into his chair, his face ashen. "What do you want?" "Want?" Sarah's laugh was cold. "I want what you tried to take from me, everything." She nodded to Marcus, who began distributing documents to the board members. "Phoenix Rising Ventures is offering to purchase Richardson Enterprises at a premium of 40% over current market value. Given the irregularities we've uncovered, I'd say that's quite generous." "This is blackmail," Victoria spat. "No, Victoria. This is business." Sarah's smile was predatory. "Although, I'm sure the SEC would be very interested in the evidence we've gathered. Not to mention the press, imagine the headlines about America's most prestigious charitable foundation being used as a personal piggy bank." One of the board members, an elderly man Sarah recognized as Judge Thompson, cleared his throat. "These allegations, they're very serious." "They're more than allegations, Your Honor." Sarah pressed another button, and new documents appeared on the screens. "Everything is here, every transaction, every cover-up, every lie. And thanks to Jennifer's cooperation, we even have internal communications discussing the plan to frame me." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "Jennifer? That little snake. Learned from the best, didn't she? Sarah cut her off. Amazing what people will reveal when they realize they're on a sinking ship. The room fell silent as the board members reviewed the documents. Sarah could see the moment realization dawned on their faces. There was no way out of this. Maxwell stood suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor. This is my company. My father built it. And you destroyed it, Sarah finished. The vote will be held this afternoon. I suggest you use the time to clear out your office. She turned to Victoria. Both of you. As if on cue, David Chen entered the room, flanked by a team of auditors. The SEC has been notified, he announced. They're requesting all financial records be frozen immediately. The next hour passed in a blur of legal discussions, shocked accusations, and desperate negotiations. Through it all, Sarah remained at the head of the table, watching as the empire the Richardsons had built crumbled before their eyes. Finally, when the room had cleared except for the shell-shocked Richardson couple and their increasingly nervous lawyers, Sarah allowed herself to move in for the kill. You know, she said conversationally, the night of the gala, I begged you to listen to me. I tried to explain that there had been a mistake. She walked slowly around the table. You didn't just refuse to listen, you humiliated me. Made me walk out in front of everyone I knew. Sarah, Maxwell began, his voice pleading, we can make a deal. A deal? Sarah stopped in front of them. Like the deal you made with James Crawford to frame me? Or the deal Victoria made with Jennifer to betray me? She leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper. The time for deals is over. Now it's time for consequences. Victoria suddenly lunged forward, her manicured nails reaching for Sarah's face. But Sarah was ready. 3 months of training with Natasha had prepared her for this moment. She caught Victoria's wrist in a grip of steel. Careful, Sarah warned, applying just enough pressure to make Victoria gasp. Assault charges wouldn't look good on top of everything else. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed, though tears of humiliation were forming in her eyes. No, Victoria. Sarah released her wrist. I'm going to enjoy every moment of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board vote to attend. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and don't bother trying to access any of your private accounts. They've all been frozen, every single one, even the ones you thought were untraceable. As Sarah walked out of the boardroom, she heard Victoria's sob of rage and despair. It was music to her ears. In the elevator, David was waiting for her. Phase 2 complete, he said with a smile. The board will vote our way, they have no choice now. Sarah nodded, checking her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. And Phase 3? Already in motion. By this time next week, the Richardson name will be nothing but a cautionary tale in business schools. As they descended toward the lobby, Sarah thought about the frightened woman she'd been just a few months ago. That woman had died the night of the gala, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone who would never be victimized again. You know, David said quietly, revenge isn't always as satisfying as people expect. Sarah watched the floor numbers tick down. This isn't just about revenge anymore, she replied. This is about justice. And justice, she smiled as the elevator doors opened, is always satisfying. Richardson Enterprises CEO steps down amid scandal, screamed the Wall Street Journal's headline. Sarah sat in what had been Maxwell's office just 24 hours ago, scanning through the morning's news coverage. The takeover had sent shockwaves through the business world, and every financial news outlet was scrambling to understand how an unknown company had managed to bring down one of America's most respected corporations. Your mother's called again, Natasha announced, entering the office with a stack of reports. That's the 10th time this week. Sarah set down her tablet, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. She'll have to wait. We have more pressing matters. She's worried about you. Says you've changed. I have changed. Sarah turned, her expression hard. The daughter she knew died the night of the gala. Speaking of which, how are our fallen enemies doing? Natasha's smile was cruel. Victoria Richardson was seen leaving the Pierre Hotel this morning. Apparently, all her credit cards were declined when she tried to extend her stay. And Maxwell? holed up in their Hampton estate, refusing all calls. Our sources say he's drinking heavily. Sarah nodded, satisfaction coursing through her veins. But before she could respond, her private line rang. The caller ID showed David Chen's number. "We have a problem," David said without preamble. "James Crawford's been found dead." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Dead? How?" "Apparent suicide. His body was discovered in his apartment an hour ago." "But Sarah..." David paused. "There's a note. He claims Victoria Richardson ordered him to frame you, threatened his family if he didn't comply." Sarah's mind raced. Crawford had been a key player in their plan to dismantle what remained of the Richardsons' empire. His testimony would have been crucial. "This is too convenient," she said, her voice tight with anger. "My thoughts exactly. Victoria was seen entering his building last night." Sarah stood, moving to the window. Below, the city stretched out like a chessboard, and she could almost see Victoria's desperate moves playing out. "She's eliminating loose ends," Natasha observed. "Get me everything on Crawford's death," Sarah ordered. "And I mean everything. If Victoria had him killed, I want proof." Just then, her assistant, a carefully vetted replacement for Jennifer, rushed in. "Miss Phoenix, you need to see this." The office's massive screens came to life, showing Victoria Richardson at an impromptu press conference outside the Pierre Hotel. She looked perfectly put together, though Sarah could detect the strain behind her polished facade. Sarah Mitchell is a vindictive woman who has orchestrated a hostile takeover based on lies and fabricated evidence, Victoria was saying, her voice trembling with apparently sincere emotion. "She has destroyed a company that has helped thousands of children, all for her personal revenge. And now, with the tragic death of James Crawford, who was like a son to me, I fear what she might do next." "Brilliant move," Natasha murmured. "She's playing the victim card, trying to turn public opinion." Sarah's laugh was cold. "Let her try." "Marcus?" Marcus Sterling emerged from the shadows of the office where he'd been quietly observing. "Already on it. We're releasing the Geneva bank records in an hour. By dinner time, everyone will know exactly where the children's charity money really went." "Not enough," Sarah said, her mind working rapidly. "Victoria's desperate now, which makes her dangerous. We need to end this today." She turned to her team. "Call the board. Emergency meeting in 1 hour. And get me Judge Thompson on the phone." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah moved through it like a force of nature, coordinating responses, issuing orders, and setting up the pieces for her final move against Victoria Richardson. When Judge Thompson's call came through, Sarah was ready. "My dear," the elderly judge's voice was grave. "I've been looking through those additional documents you sent. If these are accurate..." "They are, Your Honor. Every transaction, every threat, every crime, documented and verified. Victoria Richardson didn't just steal from charities, she systematically destroyed anyone who got in her way." "Including Mr. Crawford?" Sarah's smile was grim. "Check your email, Your Honor. You'll find security footage from his apartment building showing Victoria's late-night visit. I think the district attorney will find it very interesting." The board meeting that followed was brief but decisive. Sarah stood at the head of the table, just as she had the day before, but now she radiated an even more intense authority. "James Crawford is dead," she announced to the shocked board members. "And while Victoria Richardson plays the grieving mentor for the cameras, we have evidence suggesting she ordered his murder to silence him." The room erupted in chaos, but Sarah held up her hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, you trusted me yesterday when I showed you how the Richardsons had betrayed your trust. Now I'm asking you to trust me one more time." She laid out her plan, a complete restructuring of the company, new transparency measures, and most importantly, a public commitment to reform that would distance them from the Richardsons' corruption. But first, she concluded, we need to deal with Victoria. As if on cue, the office doors burst open, and Victoria Richardson strode in, flanked by an army of lawyers. She'd clearly come straight from her press conference, still wearing the same perfectly tailored suit. "Well," Victoria's smile was brittle, "I see the coup continues. Tell me, Sarah, How does it feel to destroy everything my husband's family built? Almost as good as it felt for you to destroy my life, Sarah replied coolly. But we're not here to discuss the past, Victoria. We're here to discuss murder. Victoria's face went white, but she recovered quickly. More lies? You really are desperate to. Security footage, Victoria. Sarah pressed a button, and the screens came to life, showing Victoria entering Crawford's building the night before. Want to explain what you were doing there? Visiting a friend in his time of need. Is that a crime now? No, but conspiracy to commit murder is. Sarah nodded to Marcus, who opened the boardroom doors. 2 police detectives entered, followed by the district attorney himself. Victoria Richardson, the lead detective, announced, "You're under arrest for the murder of James Crawford." What followed was a scene Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Victoria, her perfect composure finally cracking, being read her rights in front of the board. Her desperate attempts to maintain dignity as she was handcuffed. The flash of pure hatred she directed at Sarah as she was led away. "This isn't over," Victoria spat as she passed Sarah. "You have no idea what you've started." Sarah leaned in close, her voice for Victoria's ears only. "Oh, but I do. And unlike you, I'm going to finish it." After Victoria was gone, Sarah addressed the stunned board members. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a new day for our company. The Richardson era is over. The question is, are you ready to be part of what comes next?" The vote was unanimous. Later that evening, Sarah stood in her new office, watching the sun set over Manhattan. David Chin joined her, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Victoria Richardson arrested for murder, Maxwell Richardson in disgrace, and you in control of their empire, he mused, handing her a glass. Quite a day. It's not over yet, Sarah replied, thinking of Victoria's threat. She still has allies we haven't identified, resources we haven't found. You think she can still cause trouble from jail? Sarah's laugh was without humor. Victoria Richardson is like a cornered snake, most dangerous when she has nothing left to lose. She turned to face her mentor. Which is why we need to move on to the final phase. David raised an eyebrow. You're sure you want to go that far? They didn't just try to destroy my career, David. They tried to destroy me. And now. She looked out at the city again, her expression hardening. Now they're going to learn exactly what that feels like. As night fell over Manhattan, Sarah raised her glass in a silent toast to the woman she'd been before the gala. That woman's death had given birth to something far more powerful, far more dangerous. And she was just getting started. The New York County Criminal Court buzzed with tension as Victoria Richardson's murder trial entered its 3rd week. Sarah sat in the front row, her presence a silent reminder of how far they'd all come from that fateful night at the gala. Victoria, still immaculately groomed despite her orange jumpsuit, sat at the defense table, her face a mask of practiced innocence. The prosecution calls Catherine Phoenix to the stand, the district attorney announced. As Sarah walked to the witness stand, she could feel Victoria's eyes burning into her. The courtroom fell silent, reporters leaning forward in anticipation. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the mysterious businesswoman who had brought down the Richardson empire finally telling her story. Please state your name for the record, the clerk requested. Catherine Phoenix, Sarah paused, formerly known as Sarah Mitchell. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria's lawyers immediately objected, but the judge overruled them. Sarah had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and she delivered her testimony with devastating precision. Ms. Phoenix, the DA began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. Victoria Richardson was my mentor, Sarah's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. She took me under her wing at the Richardson Foundation, taught me everything she knew about finance and philanthropy. What I didn't realize at the time was that she was grooming me to be her scapegoat. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah methodically laid out the entire story, the embezzlement scheme, the elaborate frame-up, the night of the gala, and finally, James Crawford's murder. She described finding Crawford's real suicide note, the one Victoria's people had replaced with their fabricated version. In his true final words, Sarah concluded, James Crawford wrote that he couldn't live with the guilt of what Victoria had forced him to do. He named names, detailed accounts, and most importantly, described how Victoria had threatened his family to ensure his cooperation. Victoria's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his expensive suit a stark contrast to his client's prison attire. "Miss Phoenix, or should I say, Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that this entire prosecution is merely the culmination of your vendetta against my client?" Sarah's smile was glacial. "No, Mr. Peters. This prosecution is the result of your client's actions." "My vendetta?" She turned to look directly at Victoria. "That's something entirely different." As Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, her phone buzzed quietly in her hand. "A message from Marcus, it's done." Maxwell took the bait. Perfect timing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Sarah as she descended the steps. She could have avoided them by using the private exit, but this was part of the plan. "Ms. Phoenix, is it true that Maxwell Richardson has agreed to testify against his wife?" Sarah paused, allowing a carefully calculated look of surprise to cross her face. "No comment on ongoing legal matters. But the damage was done." Inside the courthouse, she knew Victoria would be hearing the same rumors. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Back at her office, Natasha was waiting with updates. Maxwell's lawyer made contact. "He's willing to turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity." "Of course he is," Sarah smiled, pouring herself a drink. "After all, we made sure he found those documents Victoria had hidden away. The ones that make it look like she was planning to betray him all along." "Forged documents," Natasha nodded appreciatively. "Victoria's own technique used against her. She taught me well." Sarah moved to the window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. How did Maxwell react when his lawyer showed him the evidence of Victoria's betrayal? Exactly as expected. He's drinking heavily, talking about revenge. His lawyer says he's ready to tell everything. David Chen entered the office, his face grave. "Sarah, there's something you should know. Your mother is downstairs. She's demanding to see you." Sarah's hand tightened on her glass. "Not now. She's been talking to reporters," David warned. "Saying you've changed, that she doesn't recognize her daughter anymore." "She's right." Sarah turned from the window, her expression hardening. "I'm not her daughter anymore. I'm what Victoria Richardson created the night she tried to destroy me." She set down her glass. "Have security escort my mother out." Gently, but firmly. "Sarah," David's voice was soft, "revenge has a price. Are you sure you're willing to pay it?" "I already have." She picked up a tablet, showing the latest financial reports. "Look at what we've accomplished. Richardson Enterprises is more profitable than ever. The charitable foundation is actually helping children now. We've turned their corruption into something positive. At what cost to yourself?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Victoria's lawyer is requesting an urgent meeting. Apparently, she has something she wants to tell you." "Only you." Sarah exchanged glances with Natasha and David. This was unexpected, but it could work to their advantage. "Set it up," she ordered. "But at the detention center. Let her feel the full weight of her situation." The meeting was arranged for the following morning. Sarah chose her outfit carefully, a white suit that would stand out starkly against the drab prison surroundings, a silent reminder of their reversed positions. Victoria was waiting in the prison meeting room, the orange jumpsuit unable to completely diminish her natural elegance. But there were cracks in her facade, dark circles under her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands. "Hello, Victoria," Sarah sat across from her former mentor. "Love what you've done with the place." "You've won," Victoria's voice was quiet. "Isn't that enough?" "Won?" Sarah leaned forward. "Victoria, this isn't a game. This is justice." "Justice?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my marriage, my company, my life. Maxwell is going to testify against me because of those forged documents you planted." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Forged documents?" "I learned from the best, Victoria. If they're forged, prove it. Just like I had to prove my innocence. Oh wait, you never gave me that chance. What do you want from me? I want you to feel what I felt that night at the gala. The helplessness. The humiliation. The knowledge that everything you built is being torn away, and there's nothing you can do about it. Victoria's mask finally cracked. I made you, Sarah. Everything you know, everything you've become, it's because of me. No, Sarah stood, towering over her former mentor. You didn't make me. You tried to break me. But instead, you created something far more dangerous than you could have imagined. As she turned to leave, Victoria called after her, they'll see it eventually, you know. What you've become. Your mother already has. Sarah paused at the door. What I've become is successful, powerful, and untouchable. You taught me that the only way to prevent betrayal is to become someone others fear betraying. She smiled coldly. Thank you for the lesson. Back at her office, Sarah received word that Maxwell Richardson had officially agreed to testify against his wife. Victoria's fate was sealed. But there was one piece of the puzzle left to complete. Are you ready for the final phase? David asked, watching her carefully. Sarah nodded, pulling up a document on her computer. The Richardson name still carries weight in certain circles. That ends tomorrow. She pressed send, and across the country, evidence of decades of Richardson family corruption began flowing to carefully chosen journalists. Victoria and Maxwell weren't the only corrupt ones in the family, she explained to her team. By this time tomorrow, 3 generations of Richardson crimes will be public knowledge. Their entire legacy will be destroyed. And then? Natasha asked. And then, Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I start building something new. Something better. On the ashes of what they tried to take from me. As night fell over New York, Sarah stood in her office, looking out at the city she now commanded. Tomorrow, the Richardson dynasty would fall completely. Victoria would face justice, Maxwell would face disgrace, and their entire family name would become synonymous with corruption. But as she stood there, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her was powerful, successful, feared, everything she'd wanted to become. But somewhere in those eyes, she could see what her mother had seen, the price of revenge written in the death of innocence. She turned away from the window. There would be time for reflection later. Tonight, she had an empire to destroy. 1 year to the day after the fateful gala that had changed everything, Sarah stood in the grand ballroom of the Millbrook Hotel. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but this time they weren't witnessing her destruction, they were celebrating her triumph. Miss Phoenix, a reporter from Forbes approached, digital recorder in hand. How does it feel to be named Businesswoman of the Year? Sarah smiled, remembering how she had once trembled in this very room. It feels like justice, she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. The ballroom was filled with New York's elite, but this time they weren't whispering behind their hands, they were competing for her attention. In one corner, David Chun chatted with Marcus Sterling, both men looking satisfied with the evening's proceedings. Natasha, elegant in black, watched the crowd with her characteristic vigilance. And your thoughts on today's verdict? Another reporter asked. Sarah's smile didn't waver. Just hours ago, Victoria Richardson had been found guilty on all counts: murder, fraud, embezzlement. The judge had sentenced her to 25 years. Maxwell Richardson, after turning state's evidence, had avoided jail but was now a broken man, living in a small apartment in New Jersey, shunned by the society that had once revered him. The verdict speaks for itself, Sarah replied diplomatically. Justice has been served. But it wasn't just Victoria's verdict that had made headlines today. Sarah's team had chosen this moment to release the final batch of documents, revealing decades of Richardson family corruption. The dynasty that had once seemed unassailable was now in ruins, their names synonymous with scandal. Sarah! A familiar voice made her turn. Her mother stood there, looking older and more fragile than Sarah remembered. Mother, Sarah acknowledged coolly. I'm surprised to see you here. I had to come. Her mother's eyes were filled with tears. I needed to see, to understand. To see what I'd become? Sarah finished for her. The reporters tactfully moved away, sensing a private moment. "You've changed so much," her mother whispered. "Sometimes I look at you and I can't see my daughter anymore." Sarah felt something twist in her chest, not pain exactly, but recognition of what she had sacrificed. "The daughter you knew died the night they tried to destroy her. I had to become something else to survive. But at what cost?" Her mother reached out, touching Sarah's cheek. "You've won. You've destroyed them all. Has it made you happy?" Before Sarah could answer, there was a commotion at the ballroom entrance. Jennifer, her former assistant, stood there, looking uncertain and afraid. "Let her in," Sarah commanded the security team. The crowd parted as Jennifer approached. "I'm sorry to intrude," Jennifer said softly. I wanted to thank you." The new identity, the chance to start over in Vancouver. She swallowed hard. "You could have destroyed me along with them, but you showed mercy." Sarah studied the younger woman thoughtfully. Sometimes mercy is more powerful than revenge. As Jennifer melted back into the crowd, Sarah caught David Chen watching her with a knowing smile. He'd been right all along, revenge wasn't always as satisfying as people expected. But what she'd built from the ashes of her destruction, that was something else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called for attention, tapping his glass. "A toast to Catherine Phoenix, or as some of us knew her, Sarah Mitchell. A woman who rose from the ashes of betrayal to create something extraordinary." The crowd raised their glasses, but Sarah's attention was drawn to the window, where she could see her reflection overlaid against the night sky. The woman who looked back at her was powerful, feared, respected, everything she'd fought to become. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. "You're wrong, Mother," she said quietly. "I'm still your daughter. I'm just more than that now." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Are you happy?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The past year had been a masterclass in revenge, executed with precision and devastating effect. She had destroyed her enemies, rebuilt an empire, and become someone who would never be victimized again. "I'm not the same kind of happy I was before," she admitted. "But I'm stronger. And maybe that's more important." Later that night, after the crowds had gone and the champagne had stopped flowing, Sarah stood alone in the ballroom. This room had witnessed both her greatest humiliation and her ultimate triumph. Natasha found her there, staring at the spot where she had stood a year ago as her world crumbled. "The Richardson dynasty is finished," Natasha reported. "The last of their assets were seized today. Their charitable foundations have been reorganized under your leadership. Even their family home in the Hamptons is being auctioned." "And Victoria?" "Being transferred to maximum security as we speak. She'll never hurt anyone again." Sarah nodded, satisfaction flowing through her veins. But there was something else too, a feeling she hadn't expected. Peace, perhaps. Or closure. "What now?" Natasha asked. "You've achieved everything you set out to do." Sarah turned to her mentor and friend. "Now we build something new. Something better." She smiled, and for the first time in a year, it reached her eyes. "The Richardsons used their power to destroy lives. We're going to use ours to save them." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a message from David Chen. "Board approved the new children's education initiative. Full funding for 1,000 scholarships." Sarah showed the message to Natasha. "This is what real power is, not destroying lives, but transforming them." "You've changed," Natasha observed. "I had to." Sarah moved toward the ballroom doors. "But maybe now I can change again. Not back to who I was, she's gone forever. But forward, into someone new." Outside, the city sparkled beneath a star-filled sky. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, scared and humiliated. That woman had died, yes, but from her ashes had risen someone stronger, someone who had learned that true power wasn't just about revenge, it was about what you did with victory once you had it. "You know," Natasha said as they walked toward their waiting car, "in all my years of training people in revenge, you're the first one who's understood the real lesson. Which is that the best revenge isn't just destroying your enemies. It's building something better than they ever could." Sarah smiled, thinking of the scholarships, the reformed company, the lives they would change. The woman they laughed at didn't just become someone they feared, she mused. She became someone they should have aspired to be. As their car glided through the nighttime streets of Manhattan, Sarah felt the weight of the past year finally lifting. She had achieved her revenge, yes, but she had also discovered something more valuable, her true self, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the power of transformation. The Richardsons had tried to write her story, but she had taken control of the narrative. They had tried to destroy her, but instead, they had created something far more powerful than they could have imagined. They had created a phoenix. And she had only just begun to rise.